The dog didn't growl when she walked in. That was the first thing everyone noticed, and the thing nobody said out loud until much later. The morning had started badly, which at Joint Expeditionary Training Base Keller was saying something. Bad mornings were standard issue, but this one had a particular edge to it, the kind that starts before coffee and gets worse with each hour that passes without anything resolving itself. Chief Warrant Officer Glenn Farris had been standing outside Kennel Block C since due 610, arms crossed, watching through the chain-link fence as two of his best handlers tried to work Kodiak, a 4-year-old Belgian Malinois, 72 pounds of muscle and unpredictability, into a basic compliance exercise. Kodiak had been scheduled for a joint deployment assessment. The assessment was now 48 hours away, and Kodiak, as of this morning, had bitten through a leather sleeve, shredded a second one, and sent Staff Sergeant Pell to the medical bay with a bruised forearm and a dented ego. Farris had been patient. That was over. "Somebody call Dr. Hensley at Lackland," he said to no one in particular. "Tell her we're putting Kodiak down." Sergeant First Class Ray Boudreau, who had worked with Farris for 6 years and knew better than most when to push back and when to stay quiet, stayed quiet. The call was made at 0643. By 0711, a truck nobody recognized pulled through the gate. She parked crooked, which nobody mentioned but several people noticed. The truck was a late-model F-150 in a shade of green that had faded to something closer to grey, with a dented rear bumper and a sticker on the back window for a search and rescue association out of Tucson. She got out carrying a canvas bag over one shoulder, a folded sheet of paperwork in her hand, and nothing else. No uniform, no credentials lanyard, no indication, visible from 20 yards out, of who she was or why she'd been waved through the front gate. She was maybe 28, possibly younger. She had dark hair pulled back in a tight braid, wore a grey field shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and walked with the particular kind of unhurried confidence that reads, to most military personnel, as either extremely competent or extremely unaware of where she was. Farris watched her approach from the other side of the yard. "Tell me that's not the behavioral consultant," he said. Boudreau looked at the clipboard. "Name here," says Mara Linton. "She's out of the Joint Working Dog Program. Contract, not active duty. Says she did 2 years with the Border Patrol K9 Division before that, and before that. I don't need a biography, Ray. I need someone who can tell me if that dog is salvageable before I have to make a call that wastes 3 years of federal investment." "Then yeah," Boudreau said. "That's probably her." Mara Linton reached the outer gate, showed her credentials to the watch sergeant without being asked, and was waved through. She didn't look up at the cluster of men watching from across the yard. She was reading the paperwork in her hand, lips moving slightly, like she was checking something against a list in her head. Farris met her at the gate. "You're the one they sent to evaluate Kodiak," he said. It wasn't a question. She looked up. She had very steady eyes, the kind that don't move around when they land on you. "That's right. You know what he did this morning." I read the incident report on the drive over. She tucked the paperwork under her arm, left ulnar bruising on Pell, full penetration bite on the first sleeve, second sleeve lost structurally. Kodiak disengaged voluntarily both times. Voluntarily. Farris said the word like he was testing whether it cracked under pressure. He nearly took Pell's arm off. "He stopped," she said. "That's not nothing." Nobody around them said anything. Boudreau later described the silence as the kind that comes right after someone says something you weren't expecting, when your brain is still catching up to what your ears just heard. Farris looked at her for a long moment. "You want to see him. That's why I'm here." He led her toward Kennel Block C without another word. Kodiak heard them coming before they reached the door. The sound he made wasn't quite a bark. It was lower than that, a sustained, resonant warning that came from somewhere deep in his chest and seemed to fill the block ahead of them like a pressure change in the air. Two of the kennel techs near the far end of the row visibly flinched. The Malinois in the adjacent kennel, a younger male named Grit, pressed himself against the back wall of his run. Kodiak stood at the front of his kennel with his full weight forward, muzzle pressed close to the gate, every muscle in his body engaged. He was a spectacular animal, dark sable coat, intact, no visible injuries, built low and dense the way the best working dogs are built. His eyes tracked Mara before she'd fully entered the block, and then she did something that made every person in the room hold their breath. She stopped walking, not because she was afraid, that much was obvious. She stopped the way someone stops when they want to listen, or when they're remembering something. She stood there for a few seconds, looking at the dog, and her expression was unreadable in a way that wasn't cold, more like she was sorting through something privately that she wasn't going to share yet. Kodiak watched her. His vocalization dropped by one register. Still threatening, but different. "How long has he been in this kennel?" she said. 11 days, Faris said from behind her. "Since we pulled him from the field rotation." "Same kennel the whole time?" "Yes, same feeding schedule. Standard, same handler every day or rotating." A pause. "We rotated. After the first incident." She didn't say anything to that. She didn't have to. She moved closer to the kennel gate, slowly, no particular ceremony to it, and crouched down to Kodiak's eye level. He pushed forward again, lip pulled back, showing the edge of one canine. She didn't pull back. She held still and let him work through it, and after about 15 seconds, he did something that stopped every conversation in the room. He sat, not a trained sit, not the sharp, immediate drop of a well-cued command. A slow, effortful sit, like the decision cost him something. Like he was putting something down. Faris, standing 10 feet back, said nothing. Boudreaux said nothing. The kennel tech near the door said, "What?" and caught himself. Mara reached into her canvas bag and produced a short piece of knotted rope, a tug toy, soft braided nylon, the kind used in early drive development. She held it in her left hand where Kodiak could see it, but made no move with it. Just let him register it. He registered it. She stood up slowly and turned around. Faris was watching her with an expression that had lost some of its earlier certainty. "I want to go in," she said. "Absolutely not," Faris said. "Chief, you're a contracted civilian." He put a staff sergeant in the medical bay this morning. "I'm not authorizing entry into that kennel." "He put a staff sergeant in the medical bay," she said evenly, "because your staff sergeant went in fast, made direct eye contact from above, and crowded his space while he was backed against a wall. He wasn't attacking. He was communicating. He was communicating with his teeth. Dogs communicate with their teeth. That's not dysfunction, that's language." She looked past him toward the kennel, where Kodiak had remained sitting, still watching them. "He's not broken, Chief Faris. He's grieving." Faris stared at her. "He's grieving. His handler died in Kandahar province 9 weeks ago, Sergeant David Creel. They'd been together for 2.5 years, since Kodiak's first deployment." She kept her voice level, not unkind, just factual. "The dog has been moved twice, assigned 4 different handlers in 11 days, kept in isolation between rotations, and evaluated twice by people who approached him like a liability assessment instead of a working dog. You'd bite someone too." The silence this time was different from the earlier one. It had more weight in it. Faris's jaw tightened. "I requested it 3 days ago when Dr. Hensley's office called me. That file is stricted access, yes. I have level 3 clearance through the Joint Working Dog Program. It's in my credentials packet, which your gate sergeant has a copy of." She paused. "I'm not here to step on anyone's authority. I'm here because someone thought this dog might still be worth saving. Was that a wrong assumption?" Faris looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Kodiak. The dog was still sitting, still watching Mara with that unsettled, searching attention, like a man listening to someone speak a language he almost remembers. "If he goes for you," Faris said finally, "I'm pulling you out." "He won't. That's not." "He won't," she said again. "Not arrogant. just certain, in the way that people are certain about things they've verified 1,000 times. Faris gave the nod. Boudreaux unlatched the kennel gate. The next 4 minutes were the quietest 4 minutes Glenn Faris had experienced in 22 years of military service. Mara entered the kennel alone. No sleeve, no muzzle on the dog, no backup inside. She moved left as she entered, which took her out of the direct line from the gate and gave Kodiak a clear exit path in 2 directions. A detail that Boudreaux, who had taken courses in canine behavior assessment, later identified as something you only know to do if you've spent significant time inside kennels with unstable working dogs. Kodiak rose when she entered. Not aggressive, just aware, all of his focus reorganized toward her. She didn't face him directly. She angled away slightly and crouched down, making herself smaller, and held the knotted rope loosely in one hand. She said something quiet. Too quiet for anyone outside the kennel to hear clearly. Kodiak's ears, which had been pinned halfway, came forward. She said it again, and the dog moved toward her, not lunging, not the explosive, committed drive of a dog in a bite. He moved the way dogs move when they're not sure yet, but they're leaning toward yes, cautious and quick at the same time, nose working. He pushed his muzzle against her knee, and then, in a movement so abrupt it made Boudreaux physically step forward in alarm, shoved his entire head against her chest. She put one arm around him. Outside the kennel, nobody moved for a full 5 seconds. Then Staff Sergeant Pell, arm in a compression sleeve, said, "I don't understand what I'm watching," in a voice that was barely above a whisper, and 3 other people nodded without looking at him. Mara stayed in the kennel with Kodiak for another 12 minutes. She ran him through 3 simple compliance exercises. Sit, down, heel, not with the clipped authority of a handler running a drill, but with a particular rhythm and cadence that was clearly meaningful to the dog. Kodiak performed every cue. Not reluctantly, not sloppily. Clean and fast, like something clicking back into place. When she came out, she latched the gate behind her. Kodiak sat facing her from inside the kennel, attentive, waiting. Faris met her at the door to the block. "I want to run a full environmental and handling assessment," she said. "I'll need access to his original training records, notes from Sergeant Creel if they were filed, and the field unit's incident timeline from Kandahar. I'll also need authority to restructure his handling rotation for the next 2 weeks." Faris blinked. "His deployment assessment is in 48 hours. Then postpone it." "I can't just, Chief Faris." She met his eyes. "You were 45 minutes from euthanizing a dog that just ran a full compliance set for me after 11 days in crisis isolation. I need 2 weeks, maybe less. But I need you to trust the process and let me do my job." Faris looked back through the chain link at Kodiak, who was still sitting, still watching Mara's back through the gate. 2 weeks, he said. She moved into the spare evaluation room at the far end of the kennel block that same afternoon. She didn't call it setting up a workspace. She spread Kodiak's files across the table, put a photograph of Sergeant David Creel face up in the top left corner of the work surface, and spent the first 2 hours reading. Not skimming. Reading. Making occasional pencil marks in the margin of her own notepad, cross-referencing deployment notes with behavioral observations from Kodiak's handler logs. Creel, it turned out, had been meticulous. His logs read like they were written for someone who might need them someday, detailed, specific, annotated with small personal observations that weren't required by any protocol. Kodiak prefers the south-facing run when he's wound up. Something about the light. His pre-bite signal is a shift of weight to the left front paw, not the lip. Watch the paw. He does better after a long trot than after a sprint. File this under things nobody tells you in K9 school. Mara sat with those notes for a long time. Boudreaux found her there at 1800 when he came by to check whether she'd eaten. She hadn't. He left a sandwich on the corner of the table without comment and went back to the main building. Later he would say he wasn't sure what made him do it. He wasn't the type to make gestures like that. but something about the way she'd been sitting there, surrounded by a dead man's handwriting, made it feel like the right call. The next morning, she started work. She was in before 600 every day. She ran Kodiak on a fixed schedule that matched, as closely as she could reconstruct it, the one Creel had documented in his field logs. Same feeding times, same exercise windows, same balance of drive work and passive time. She let him decompress in the south-facing run every afternoon, and she never raised her voice in the kennel block, not once, regardless of what was happening around them. By day 3, Kodiak was eating full meals again. By day 5, he was initiating contact through the kennel gate during her check-ins, pressing his nose to her hand, following her movement with that focused, anticipatory attention that working dogs reserve for the people they've decided to trust. Faris watched from the block entrance one morning and said nothing. Boudreaux watched from further back and said to Pell quietly, "That's not something you learn in a classrooms." Pell, whose arm had healed clean, watched Mara walk Kodiak on a loose lead through the outer yard. No sleeve, no back tension leash, just a flat lead and a dog who was choosing to stay at her left heel because he wanted to, and didn't say anything at all. On day 7, she introduced the first new handler. She'd requested specialist Tomas Guerrero specifically. Chosen, she told Faris, not because he was the most experienced handler on the base, but because he had the lowest reactivity profile in the incident reports, and because Creel's notes mentioned he and Guerrero had overlapped at Fort Bragg for 8 months and had a mutual respect notation in the personnel cross-reference. She'd read that far in. Guerrero was visibly nervous the first morning. He stood at the kennel gate the way people stand when they're trying to look calm and not quite managing it, hands loose at his sides, weight slightly back. Mara stood beside him and talked him through it the way someone talks you, through a landing you're not sure you can make. Steady, practical, no false reassurance. "Don't crowd the gate," she said. "Let him come to you. If he breaks toward you fast, just hold still. He's checking, not threatening. And if I can't tell the difference," Guerrero said, "watch his left front paw." Guerrero looked at her sideways. "Creel's note," she said. "Day 47 of their first deployment. Read it if you get a chance." Guerrero went very still. He looked back at the gate. "You read all of them?" "I read all of them." The introduction took 22 minutes. By the end of it, Kodiak had accepted a treat from Guerrero's hand and allowed contact on the scruff without breaking posture. Mara watched from the far side of the yard with her arms crossed and didn't say anything except when Guerrero came out, "Same time tomorrow." 2 days before the rescheduled assessment, Chief Faris called her into his office. It was a sparse room, a desk, 2 chairs, a whiteboard with a readiness grid that needed updating, and a framed unit photo on the wall that had been there long enough to develop a slight lean to the right. He gestured to the chair across the desk. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He looked at her for a moment, with the particular expression of a man who has made a decision he didn't fully plan to make, and is working out how to announce it. "The behavioral report you filed yesterday. The one recommending Kodiak for full reinstatement pending continued handler development with Guerrero. Yes, Command accepted it this morning." She didn't react outwardly. "Good, I want to ask you something." He folded his hands on the desk. "And I'd like an honest answer, not a programmatic one. I usually give those." "How did you know?" He paused. "Day 1. In the kennel block. Before you'd run any assessment, before you'd seen his records from Kandahar, you looked at that dog through a chain-link fence and told me he wasn't broken. How did you know that?" Mara was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know," she said. "Not for certain. You never know for certain from 20 feet away." She looked at the framed photo on the wall. "But I've worked with a lot of dogs, and the ones who are truly gone, you can see it. Something behind the eyes just isn't there anymore. They're not angry. They're not in pain. They're just absent." She looked back at Faris. Kodiak wasn't absent. He was furious and terrified and completely shut down, but he was still in there. He was still looking for something. Looking for what? For someone who spoke his language. She paused. Creel spent 2.5 years building a communication system with that dog. Every signal, every cadence, every small ritual that made Kodiak feel oriented and safe. When Creel died, that whole system just disappeared. 11 days of rotating handlers, each one speaking a different dialect, none of them knowing what Creel had built. From the dog's perspective, it wasn't training that failed, it was the world stopped making sense, and nothing in the environment was telling him it ever would again. Faris said nothing for a long moment. "The logs," he finally said. "You used Creel's logs to rebuild it, as much as I could reconstruct." She looked at her hands briefly. "It's not the same. It never will be. What he had with Creel was specific to them, and some of it is gone. But the bones of it, the rhythm, the cue sequences, the environmental preferences, those I could work from." She paused. "And then Guerrero. He has good instincts. He listens. He'll build his own version of it over time. If they let him stay with the dog long enough, I'll make sure of it." She nodded once. Faris leaned back in his chair. "I owe you an apology." She looked at him. "Day one, when you arrived." He wasn't quite comfortable with this, visibly, but he wasn't avoiding it either. "The way I spoke to you, you were skeptical. That's your job." "I was dismissive." He said it flatly, without softening it. "And I was wrong. I assumed what I could see, which wasn't much, and I stopped there. You were right about the dog, and right about what he needed, and I nearly put him down before you got here, because I was reading the wrong signals." A pause. "That's not the kind of assessment error I like to make twice." Mara looked at him for a moment. Something shifted slightly in her expression. Not quite a smile, but something in that direction. "You didn't put him down," she said. "Somebody made a call. Maybe you, maybe the system. Either way, the call came through. You're being generous, I'm being practical. Kodiak is here. He's going to deployment assessment day after tomorrow. That's what matters." Faris nodded slowly. "You'll be there?" "For the assessment." "Wouldn't miss it." The assessment was scheduled for 0800 on a Tuesday in the outer training field behind Kennel Block A. It was a dry, flat morning. The kind of early summer day that starts mild and gets brutally hot by noon. The assessment team was already set up when Mara arrived. 2 evaluators from the Joint Working Dog Program, a representative from the deploying unit, a veterinary officer, and Faris, who stood at the edge of the field with his arms at his sides, and the particular stillness of a man who is trying not to visibly root for an outcome. Guerrero brought Kodiak out at 0802. The dog was composed, not the brittle, over-controlled composure of an animal being held together by pressure, genuinely settled, moving with the loose ground-covering efficiency that healthy working dogs move with. He was wearing his operational collar, and he stayed clean at Guerrero's left heel across the field without being held there. The evaluators ran the full protocol: obedience sequence, environmental stress exposure, controlled aggression scenario with a suited decoy, off-leash directed task. Kodiak hit every marker. Clean responses, no inappropriate escalation, solid re-engagement after the aggression scenario, which was, historically, where dogs with handler grief disruption tended to fall apart. He didn't fall apart. When the decoy hit the ground and Guerrero gave the out command, Kodiak released on the first cue and held his position, while the evaluator walked a wide arc around the field 20 yards away. No restart, no second command, just the dog holding, waiting, with that focused, intelligent attention forward. One of the evaluators made a notation on his clipboard. Faris exhaled. Mara watched from outside the field boundary, standing alone at the fence line. She had her arms crossed and her eyes on the dog. When Kodiak held his out and Guerrero moved to his side and put one hand briefly on the dog's withers, a simple gesture, quiet, just contact, she looked down at the ground for a moment. The assessment concluded at 921. Kodiak was cleared for full operational reinstatement with a recommended continued handler stability protocol. Guerrero's name was attached to the file as primary handler, with a 6-month development window flagged. Faris crossed the field to where Mara was standing. "Clear," he said. She nodded. "Good dog." "Good work," he said. They stood for a moment at the fence line, watching Guerrero run Kodiak through a cool-down circuit at the far end of the field. Loose, no commands, just the two of them moving together across the morning ground. The dog tracked slightly ahead of him, occasionally checking back, the way a dog checks back when it trusts that someone is following. "He'll be all right," she said. "It wasn't quite a question." "Yeah," Faris said. "I think he will." She picked up her canvas bag from the fence post where she'd left it. She had a long drive back to Tucson and a consult call at 1400 she needed to prepare for. She'd been here 13 days. She had eaten more meals out of vending machines than she'd eaten sitting down, had slept in a room that smelled like concrete and solvent, and had spent a significant portion of the last 2 weeks in the company of a grieving dog and a dead man's handwriting. She didn't think any of that was remarkable. It was the job. "Safe drive," Faris said. "Thanks, Chief." She walked across the parking area to the faded green truck. Guerrero, at the far end of the field, brought Kodiak to a stop and looked back once. Maybe by coincidence, maybe not, and the dog looked back too, turning his head toward the parking area for a moment before Guerrero touched his collar lightly, and they moved on. She got in the truck. She pulled the seatbelt across. She sat for a second with both hands on the wheel, looking out through the dusty windshield at the training field, where a dog she had helped put back together was moving through the morning with someone new. Then she started the truck and drove out the gate.